Hello, everyone, and welcome to Leave It to Beavers, Building Resilience with Beaver Dam Analogues. This is a two-part webinar series to learn about the potential of beaver dam analogues to help with flood protection, drought mitigation, while improving wildlife habitat. Now, here's an idea that holds water, working with beavers. I'm glad you've logged on to gnaw on this topic with us today and endure my puns at the top of the hour. If you wanted to introduce yourself in the chat, you're welcome to. We'd love to know who's joining from across the country, world, and let us know where you're joining us from. I'm Elizabeth Shearer. I'm your moderator this morning. And I'm proud to be able to produce this webinar alongside IISD because beavers are increasingly recognized as powerful partners in watershed resilience. Their dams slow water, store it on the landscape, reconnect floodplains, reduce erosion, improve habitat, and help buffer both floods and drought when built in the right places. Bit of housekeeping off the top is that we welcome questions using the Q&A function in the Zoom platform. Each of our presenters will be given 15 to 20 minutes, and there'll be 3 speakers this morning. This panel discussion will end with audience Q&A at the end of the event. So feel free to put your questions in the Q&A function, but we won't be getting to Q&A until the end of the event. I wanted to make sure that folks know as we're diving into this topic, if you have a site in mind that may benefit from BDAs, you can contact Ashley from IISD, and I'll invite her to put her email in the chat. Next slide, please. This webinar is part of a larger series organized by Natural Infrastructure for Water Solutions that ClimateWest is pleased to partner on. NEWS is a 5-year initiative led by IISD to help scale up natural infrastructure for cleaner water and more resilient communities. NEWS aims for natural infrastructure to be backed by evidence, adopted at local scales, financed, and enabled by policy. Ashley will put the link in the chat or scan the QR code on the screen to sign up for their monthly newsletter, which includes natural infrastructure-related news, reports, and events. Next slide, please. I'm pleased to offer a land acknowledgement this morning. The work of our organization, ClimateWest, occurs on Treaty 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who have lived in and cared for these lands since time immemorial. Our office is located on Treaty 1 territory in Winnipeg, the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Innuit, Nehituak, Anishinawak, and Dakota Aniakte, the homeland of the Red River Métis Nation. This territory is also a place of significance for the Dene Sulin and the Inuit. Next, I'd like to share a bit of who ClimateWest is. You may have heard of us. We're a regional climate adaptation service hub for Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. We help municipalities, Indigenous communities, organizations, and businesses understand the potential hazards and impacts of a changing climate and how to prepare for risks to continue to thrive in the face of these climate challenges. We are part of a national network of climate service providers that work in partnership with the Canadian Centre for Climate Services to support Canadians to prepare for our changed and changing climate. And we are funded by the governments of Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Canada. A bit more about what we do. In the next slide, we share climate information and resources. We help to amplify the most up-to-date and credible climate information available. As a network organization, we also connect people to people and information into action. We can help you find local climate data and understand its implications and how you integrate climate data into decision-making. So on the screen, you'll see some of our knowledge products that we've produced. For example, snapshot of a changing prairie climate report that we commissioned in 2022 outlines the many changes we could see in the region, both short and long term. This might not come as a surprise to folks on the call, but that our winters, springs, and falls are projected to become wetter across the region. In contrastly, the summers, especially in the south, are projected to become drier, even though large rainstorms capable of causing flash floods are also projected to increase during the summer. A lot of the solutions that we're exploring here today with BDAs offer what we're exploring here as part of this two-part series to help us adapt to these changes in climate. If you would like to learn more about these projections for the region, please visit our website. You can read this full report and many, many other resources online. We also encourage you to reach out to us. We actually have a phone number, help desk, that you can call up at any time. We don't answer every time. When we're sleeping, we usually leave the phone off, but you're able to call us when you have a burning question, email, or sign up for our newsletter to get the latest info from our organization. In the next slide, I wanted to share our annual flagship event that's coming up in a few short months. This year, we're returning back to Winnipeg in our 4th year of hosting this event, and we hope you can join us. So please save the date, May 12th to 13th. Maybe Elsa, you could put a link in the chat when we're finished on where to access this information. You're welcome to find the save the date information at climatewest.ca, and we really hope you can join. It is in person in Winnipeg, but it's also a virtual hybrid event, so you can join from wherever you are. And I'd also like to mention it is completely free, as registration fees are $0. In the next slide, I just want to close by saying a few more things about the housekeeping that folks may have missed at the top when I first started. Please use the Q&A function to ask questions. The Q&A will be at the end of the event. And friendly reminder that if you are inspired by this webinar in any shape or form and you would like to, and you have a site in mind that would benefit from BDAs, please contact Ashley from IISD and she'd love to help you take it to the next stage in your BDA journey. So again, here's our information about how to stay in touch with ClimateWest. Feel free to take a screenshot or scan the QR code and connect with us and continue on being involved with our work. Without further ado, I would like to introduce the first speaker. Our first speaker is Stephen Bennett from Branch Solutions. I'll let Stephen come to the screen. Hello. And I'll hand the floor over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth. Start my timer here. So yeah, my name is Steve Bennett. I'm a fish and wildlife biologist, and I've been lucky to be working on stream restoration projects for the last 20 years or so, and down in the States, where many of these methods were sort of rediscovered. So we're going to be talking about low-tech process-based restoration. I'll explain in some detail what that's all about. But this lengthy and somewhat awkward title to my presentation is trying to sum up everything I'm going to talk about in the next 20 minutes. I think I might have to share my screen first, though, or is it sharing? All right. Could somebody just confirm they can see my screen?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay. And there's a little bit of a lag time here. There we go. So I'll start with a message. I understand we've got a broad group of people here, so sometimes I'll get a little technical. But really what we're talking about today is taking degraded streams, or riverscapes as we sometimes call them, and trying to restore them. And to do that, you have to have a little bit of knowledge, and you have to have some ways of figuring out how you're going to get from degraded to non-degraded. And so we use this term, it's called process-based restoration. And so processes need to be engaged to get from degraded to restored. And we'll talk about those as I go. And then, as Elizabeth mentioned, healthy rivers are often connected to their floodplain, and there's reasons why that's really valuable. And then I like to have a little cautionary note because I've been doing this for a while now, and you have to have some patience. Most of the degradation that I'm going to talk about happened over decades or even centuries. And so we shouldn't really expect that we're going to build a BDA and then everything's going to be Shangri-La after that. So that might even involve you doing some maintenance on the original restoration that you started. So I'll talk a little bit about what low tech is, why we need it, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can be effective at actually implementing it. Then I'll briefly mention a couple of case studies, but wait for Jay's talk next to really tell us some of the exciting things that these structures can do and Beaver can do. And then I'll end with some lessons. So sometimes the easiest way to talk about what something is to talk about what it isn't. And so there's a long history of engineering in stream restoration. This is a picture of downtown Reno, Nevada. Sometimes that's the most appropriate type of restoration. It's form-based, which means you're basically building the river that you want. It's done precisely so that there's low risk. It's stable, so you can rely on it, and it's predictable. Process-based restoration is really very few of those things. It was originally written about in the 90s and is now becoming more common. And it's, again, what I mentioned at the beginning, it's about restoring processes, and those could be erosion or deposition. It could be widening, connection, just basic physical things out in the river. And what the people who develop this approach really recommend is that you understand your local setting. So rivers are similar all over the world, but there are also differences in rivers. And so you should be able to understand what kind of river it is that you're working in. And before you start building BDAs, you should really understand what it is that's broken about your river. BDAs may not be the thing that's going to fix it, or log jams, which I'm also going to talk about. But another really important thing is we have to scale restoration up. There's been lots of studies done to show that many, many, many thousands of kilometers of river are degraded. So a couple of BDAs are not going to fix this problem either. It's a very large scale problem, so we need to scale up to that problem. And lastly, you really have to understand where you're trying to get to be successful. So that's the outcomes. What is it that you're actually hoping to do? And then what are the pathways to get there? And one thing that we've learned, our group that's been working on this stuff for a couple of decades is, we need all the tools we can get. And so there's a continuum of things we can do, from just changing management, and that's on the left of this little slider here. So just protecting riparian areas or banning beaver trapping in a place you want beaver to be can be very effective, all the way to building structures by hand or getting out heavy machinery when necessary. So we need them all. And then in my title, I had this mimic, promote, and sustain, and that's just a way of us trying to explain the steps, right? So on the left there, we've built a little log jam. So we're mimicking a natural log jam in a river. And what we're doing is trying to promote these processes. And so one process, believe it or not, is to recruit trees, because trees naturally fell into rivers. And that's called tree recruitment. It's part of the wood regime that kicks off development of pools, and eventually we'll get to sustainability. So we're starting with mimicking, but we're hoping to get to sustainability. So for those of you that haven't flipped through our guidebook that we wrote on this topic, this was version 1 of a beaver dam analog, and we're looking at it in 3 different views here. And essentially the idea was you would weave willows through posts that you drove into the stream by a handheld hydraulic post pounder, and you would throw some sediment on the front end of that, and you can pond water. And here's a classic example of a wicker weave, is another name that these things are called. But wood is also an important part of rivers, and so we also developed what we call post-assisted log structures. We use that same idea of driving posts into the stream, except this time we're adding small logs that we can carry by hand. And these structures, unlike BDAs, they work mostly during high flow by shunting the flow or changing the flow to create scour or widening or splitting the flow. But they can also pond some water, but usually that's after they've kind of plugged up a little bit. So really simple stuff. I'm not going to talk too much about how we build those, but happy to talk about that later. So why do we need this stuff? Well, simply we've lost a lot of very productive, connected river styles, river types. We've lost those mostly because of human development, and starting with trapping of beaver to building roads and cutting down the riparian areas, amongst other things. And what we've really done is we've lost a lot of storage of water and storage of sediment, wood contribution to the rivers, and essentially these were some of the most ecologically diverse and productive landscapes on the landscape. And really, the way this mechanism happened was that beaver dams or wood, they're the structure that change the flow, and by changing flow, we create fast flow and slow flow, which is either going to promote scouring or deposition. And all of these things together create complex and connected riverscapes. And now what we're left with is a lot of streams that look more like this. This technical term for this would be incision, where the stream has cut down, the channel has gone down. It's now simplified. It has much lower productivity. And if you step back and look at this site from the air, what you see is this yellow dotted line is the historic floodplain. And that floodplain is disconnected because the water table has dropped. And so now riparian vegetation can't grow there anymore. And so we get upland vegetation, and we've just lost all this productivity. This is the only really technical slide I put in there. But for those of you that are going to be wanting to do this kind of work, going back to these pathways. So this is called a stream evolution model, and this was actually a really important part of science about a decade ago, where this was new. And what it's showing is this anastomosing, which is just a fancy way of saying a connected river with lots of channels. That's what we've lost. And as you go around the circle here, the incised state of the river is what we've got a lot of now. And to get back there, you have 2 options. You can go around the circle by widening and then grading and widening, and you can eventually get back there, but it takes centuries by itself. Or you can add structure to speed that up. However, you can also go backwards, which is much quicker, and just grade. And here's an example of somebody who built a BDA. You can see it's an incised stream. Here's the floodplain up here. And they built this BDA, and in 1 year, they got 3 to 5 feet, or a meter and a half of sediment deposition or aggradation. And so these structures can be very effective at addressing incision in the right circumstances. Okay, so how can you be effective at this? Well, you have to sort of recognize the business you're getting into. And one of the things is that there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of things we don't know. We don't know exactly what every river looked like. So trying to restore it back to some function that you're not sure of, it has uncertainty. We don't know the role of beaver in all the different river types across North America. We don't know how long it might take to restore these things. And there's risk in some places for infrastructure, and we can't always identify that with great precision. So there's a way to deal with that, and that's written by a guy named Briley, who is a river scientist. And he's come up with this really elegant way of going out and describing what you see. And anybody can do that. You just go out and you start describing things. And so I've got two pictures of completely different river types. One is on the West Coast, gets 2 meters of rain a year, and the other one's in the interior and gets less than a few inches. So we can describe those things, and then we can try to explain what it is that we're describing. Why is this river dry? Is it supposed to be dry, or has something changed that is making it that way? And then when we go to do some restoration, we can make a bunch of predictions about what might happen. And then once we start doing restoration, we can learn. And that's essentially what people call adaptive management. So when we do this work, we want to describe at least these 4 things. We want to understand the vegetation, especially the riparian area. We want to understand the role that wood might have played in this river. We want to understand the flow regime, how much water is there, when does it flow, and the sediment regime. And then we want to know the role of beaver. We wrote, everywhere you see this is a citation. We've written papers on all this stuff, and I'm happy to share those with people. And so just as an example, the flow regime is really important because it's the flow that does the work for you. You put the structure in, and then the water does the work. So you should know something about the flow. Are you in a perennial stream or an intermittent stream or even an ephemeral stream? And I could talk more about that, but we'll save it for later. So a couple of quick examples of where this kind of thinking and work has really given great benefits. This is a fairly famous study in Susie Creek in Nevada, and just simply changing the way they grazed on this landscape changed the river. So on the left, in the late 80s, they were grazing in the summer at no riparian vegetation, rivers pretty degraded. Over decades, they changed the grazing management to fall grazing. The willows came back, then the beaver came back, and now this rancher has water when none of his neighbors do. He has a greater production of beef, and we've also got Lahontan cutthroat trout that are now using this stream. So it's a win for sort of everybody. I just threw this in here because there's so much low-tech restoration happening now. There's almost, it seems like every second graduate student is studying low-tech. So up in the corner, there's a map. We've even got some Alberta research represented here. And this graph is just showing that they looked at 65 different projects across the West, and pretty much all of them were showing benefits to either the riparian area or capturing sediment, storing water, or affecting the stream temperature in some way. And so there's lots of research coming out, as I guess the short story. As I mentioned, we've been working on this stuff for 20 years. we've been lucky enough to have two multi-year experiments that we did. One where beaver dam analogues were developed. That's Bridge Creek in Oregon. And then Asotin Creek, where we developed the post-assisted log structures. And what I'm doing here is I'm contrasting these two studies. We're talking 20 years, $10 million in monitoring. So we threw the kitchen sink at this thing. And on the left, in Bridge Creek, they built 120 BDAs, and then the Beaver moved in, and they got this huge increase in the amount of floodplain that was connected and the side channels that were connected. But I've made in bold here the production. That's production of juvenile steelhead, which people really care about because they're listed as endangered. And they almost got a 200% increase in the production of steelhead in Bridge Creek. You contrast that to the Asotin, we put in 700 structures of these log jams over 14 kilometers, and we got basically smaller or less positive results. We still got positive results, but they were smaller. And the reason is that these streams are different. So that's number one. One is lower gradient, wider floodplain. That's Bridge Creek. But the other really important reason is that it was the beavers moving into Bridge Creek and then building another 300 dams by themselves that really helped to connect this floodplain. And that story kind of got lost somewhere, and everybody thinks that BDAs are magic, and they're useful, but beaver are way better. All right, I'm not sure where I am on time, but just a few lessons. So the biggest one, in a way, is that this low-tech process-based restoration is really engaging people. This is a website that we manage, and I've just got some statistics there. So, this is in the States. We've treated over 1,000 kilometers, 500 projects, 22 different states and provinces. It's really taken off, and that's because it's engaging people that were really excluded from restoration before. So that's a good thing. But with lots of people getting into this, there's plenty of confusion, and most people aren't river scientists, but they like playing in rivers. The example I'm showing here is that's a BDA that was built, and the person that we built it for said, "Hey, all your BDAs failed." And we went out the next spring to look at them, and this is what we saw. This is the best case I've ever seen of channel widening, which is one of the processes that you need to recover an incised stream. And so it just told me that even though we had talked a lot to the people we were working with, they really didn't understand what we needed to do to get from point A to point B. So,
Stephen, I'm just going to jump in and just give you your 1 minute to warning.
Okay, perfect. Little things like we've learned to build BDAs better. We can talk about that another time, but there's there's version 1, which I showed you. This is version 3. And I can't stress enough that we need to do maintenance. Rivers are dynamic. These are the same area. We built a structure, the structure split the flow, and then it built a bar there. We were all excited. The next time we came back, it wasn't there. That's normal, and you just have to accept it and be in this for the long haul. So know your stream. Complexity and connection is where all the productivity is, and be prepared to potentially, work on your streams for a long time. Thanks very much.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Stephen. And thank you for sharing all those great success stories and, important points to consider when you're approaching these projects. I appreciate all of that flow as well, that you're going from, mimic, promote, sustain, and you have these processes that you can follow to assess and keep things on track and be part of that natural flow. Thank you so much. And again, just a reminder that you can enter questions into the Q&A chat, and we'll get to Q&A section at the end. So thanks again, Stephen. Next, I'm going to pass it along to Elliot Lindsay, who also just shared the guidebook that Stephen referenced. It's in the chat if you do want to access that. So thanks for doing that, Elliot. I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much for the introduction, Elizabeth, and it's good to follow up Stephen here. Steve was part of the group of people that really kind of got us going on this in Alberta, so I'm hoping to share a couple of examples from here in Canada. Just share my screen here. Should be able to see it now.
Yes, yes, looks great.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, the title of my talk is Making a Mess of Fish Habitat. I think anyone who's seen presentations from us before knows we like to use this term mess quite a bit in a lot of our different kind of genres of restoration, but particularly um, with low-tech process-based restoration, that's kind of sometimes the easiest way of explaining what it is we're doing. We're trying to just make a mess. Um, we are, I'm coming to you from Freshwater Conservation Canada. I just wanted to throw this up there because some of you may know us as our former name, which was Trout Unlimited Canada, and we did make that change in 2024. Yeah, it's the same organization you know and love. We just have a different name and look. Um, we're a national not-for-profit organization, so if you are in Canada and you are interested in this kind of work, we would love to know about it and to understand how we could support you. Um, and yeah, we have a broad base of members, supporters, partner organizations, as well as volunteer chapters scattered across the country. These are our priorities, so I'm sure that you can see that this work relates directly to all of these things. So that's why we're pretty amped about it. Um, and yeah, with that, I'll try to get into some examples here. This is just an example of a working group that we are part of. We're part of quite a few of these, but um, this is a good example of just a bunch of member organizations kind of pulling in the same direction to achieve some big goals. So yeah, I like to sort of think about first, where did we come from? Stephen had some great content there about just kind of thinking about your riverscape and um, where has it been? Where can you go? And sometimes you can dig up some good nuggets of information from the past and some old reports. Um, there's often like some great traditional knowledge that you can gain from working with your local First Nations and Indigenous communities, as well as like local producers. And a lot of people either have good oral histories or documented histories about how things used to be. And this is just one example of many, many places in Canada that, were much wetter places with more fish, more beavers, all of those things. So it helps to kind of understand where we came from so that we can set realistic goals and be able to kind of convince people that, yes, this is actually a realistic thing. It was that way at one time, so it can be that way again. These are kind of horrendograms. This is from the paper that Stephen was mentioning from Clure and Thorne 2014. And kind of just what I want you to take away from this is that um, the stage that a lot of our streams are in is in this like incised state. And they basically have the least amount of habitat and the lowest diversity of habitats available. So there's just less habitat and it's less complex. That's pretty much all this is trying to show. And when you compare that to these messy, structurally complex systems, they have way more habitat and they have way more diversity of habitats. So that's kind of like a key principle here that we're trying to shoot for. And again, we are kind of building these two things. Sometimes they break and the BDAs end up looking more like a PAL, but that's by design. And as Steve mentioned, they do their work at different stages. So BDAs are working all the time at any flow, and the PALs or log jams are doing most of their work at high flow. I want to give you some examples of some successful projects. So this is one project. It's northwest of Calgary. It's in a pretty incised little creek in the foothills. It was probably ditched historically to make way for some access roads. There's like an adjacent gravel pit. Um, but you can kind of see it's just like it's a very simple single threaded channel where once there was a pretty complex valley floor with lots of channels and beaver ponds and dams. Looking at it from downstream, yeah, I mean, it looks like we kind of refer to this as like a bowling alley stream. It's like straight, simple, uh, structurally starved. It doesn't have a lot of stuff in the creek, although it is green and clean, so it's maybe deceptive in that it doesn't look that bad, but there's some problems going on here. And all of the willows that you can see kind of at the edges of the stream are at the level that this creek used to be. So it used to be able to wind around on the floodplain here, and it can't really get up there anymore except under like extreme high flows. So this is looking from above. You can see that one section of creek is like arrow straight. That's a red flag. Tells us that something has changed. And looking upstream, uh, close to the top of the picture, you can actually see the kind of old footprint of a lot of beaver dams there and those kind of paler patches in the vegetation. So yeah, the objective here is to get it back up onto the floodplain. And so to do that, we needed to sort of visualize what the valley floor could look like and what it looks like currently. And basically, this is just trying to show you the top frame is kind of what we're shooting for, a nice, complex, meandering, messy kind of valley floor. This is from the manual that, again, it's a really good resource. This is like my favorite figure from there. It just kind of shows you like the trajectory that you're kind of going for. So we want it to go from a dry, incised, simple channel to a green wet mess. So in 2022, this was our first kind of kick at the LT-PBR cam. We built 3 BDAs. The creek was dry at the time. It was dry a lot of the time in this pre-implementation phase. Um, Once we were done, the next year, in the fall, when it probably otherwise would have been dry, there was still water there, which was pretty encouraging. Um, yeah, this is my colleague Angela. So you can tell how excited we are that this thing was full of water and hadn't dried up yet that year. So we were pretty encouraged by this, and we started kind of the process of thinking about what permits and funding and permissions and everything we might need to move beavers back here manually because we thought it was too far away for them to come back on their own. We were wrong. The beavers came back the next year, which was really exciting. That was like, I think Leslie and Angela were out there, and I can just imagine how excited they were when they went upstream and saw this huge beaver dam. Um, yeah, it was great to see. And now there's like acres of water up there. This part of the creek never goes dry. And the beavers are like rapidly expanding back through the valley. So this is cool. We kind of got lucky with this one. We did some pretty small scale intervention, and then we had the kind of explosion of beavers come back again. This is another example on King Bolt Creek. So we had another LTPBR project that we undertook here in more of like a foothills system. Again, we were just trying to keep this creek from drying out as regularly as it was. We built a whole bunch of BDAs here with a bunch of volunteer labor, which is a consistent theme with all of our projects. So like Steven said, it's a great way to get people out. Like anybody who can shovel mud or cut sticks or drag stuff around is definitely qualified to help with these projects, and that's kind of what makes it so fun. This is one of those BDAs on King Bull Creek. You can see again, it's like a dry channel. It's drying up pretty regularly these days in the fall, and so we're trying to kind of get it out of this rut. Um, this is the same structure in the springtime, and you can see that it's forcing those flows up onto the old floodplain. We've got like 2 channels going on. There's water flowing through the willows. So this is pretty exciting stuff to see when we go back in the spring to see how things are doing. This is from another angle. You can see there's 2 or 3 in series here. And thinking longer term, like in that adaptive management context, like we aren't done here. This is just like the start. This is kind of phase 1. Ideally, we would be getting this whole floodplain wet again, and that's kind of those blue, in between those blue lines there. Yeah, this is just another look from above. You can see how it's ponding up the water around the corner there. And yeah, this just goes to show that it's quite a big work party. We've got people on a post pounder, we got people with shovels, there's people dragging trees around, some people are hanging out chatting, somebody's got a chainsaw. Move on to another project here. This is primarily a PALS project. A little bit further north, we built quite a larger number of structures here. This is like further along in our LTPBR kind of trajectory. Um, so yeah, we've built I think now like over 40 structures here, but this just is a good example of kind of the work party. Okay, I am at 10 minutes. That's good. Um, this is what it looks like at Radiant Creek before we did anything. So it was pretty severely overgrazed. Not a lot of structural elements in the channel. And this creek was drying up in kind of late summer, fall, depending on how much rain we get. Part of the problem here was feral horses as well. So we fenced this whole project area out with some panel fence in 2021, and then we kind of got to work on adding some structure back. This is showing you from above. I mean, this could be like a lot of places. I mean, you see this around the world essentially, where we've taken these big, wide valley floors and constricted them down into a little pinch point under a bridge. And so it just takes all of that stream energy and power and it's kind of blasting these channels out into these straight incised stream reaches with all the problems associated with that. The blue line is where the creek used to be. So again, we're just trying to encourage some meandering and some reconnection to that former floodplain by adding structure. This is like a fancy diagram just of what's happening there. We're basically putting stuff in the channel to create a diversity of flow paths and encourage some erosion because erosion is a perfectly fine thing. Some deposition and some scouring. This is what it looks like building them. It's pretty straightforward. It's just a bunch of branches and logs and wood, and we pin them in place with these untreated pine posts. This is one of our kind of favorite structures. It's a mid-channel pal, and yeah, in the precondition, you can just see that there are a few channels, which is good, but this reach was drying out and not a lot of structural complexity. So we add the structure, and then we just got to wait for the high flow. Eventually, we got some high flows, and you can see this is a picture taken not quite at peak flow, but it's still pretty high, and you can see how these structural elements just kind of force a diversity of flow paths. There's a bunch of deposition. There's stuff racking up on this during high flows. And so when the water recedes, we can see all of the cool new kind of habitat features that are left behind. This is the same structure. I think this may have been last year we took this picture, and it's pretty cool to see over time now. It's really starting to like mature and come into its own. There's like a whole new meander bend here. There's a pool. There's like a cool little glide going on. There's a riffle pool sequence on the upstream side. The floodplain has grown in height. Like there's been a ton of material deposited on there. So I think the important thing to note here is that we didn't design any of these features. We just put the structure into the system and let the creek create these features on its own. This is another photo of a pal that I think is really like instructive. It's got some slow areas where a lot of finer sediments deposited, and those have become new floodplain surfaces where little sapling trees and shrubs can establish and grow. The channel's lengthening. You can see on the far side our fence fell in because we lost like a couple meters of bank there, which was great. That was part of the point of these structures. We had to move the fence obviously, but the creek is really responding to adding these structural elements. So that's pretty cool to see. Looking from above, I hope this is like easy to tell kind of what's going on here. The takeaway here is that it's pretty straight, it's pretty featureless, it's quite shallow. Um, we add the structures, you can see those here. These are the pals, they're kind of big clusters of logs. They almost look like a bundle of sticks from this scale. Then we add some high flow and the channel responds in a bunch of cool ways. So we have some brand new riffles, some new pools that are much deeper than anything that was there prior. And yeah, things are just getting messy. That's the new kind of stream center line in blue. So you can see it's starting to wiggle. This is a side by side between 2020 and 2024. And the takeaways here are that, again, the creek is responding to adding this structure by increasing its meander. There's a bunch of new habitats forming. Vegetation is recovering really well from being wetter for longer and also just having that fence up around the site, keeping some of that grazing pressure off. Um, so yeah, we're getting a whole bunch of cool outcomes that are starting to happen here after a few years of work. And again, that's kind of the stream center line to give you an idea of how we're getting some wiggle back. Not too far away, we have another project on Elk Creek. It's pretty similar objectives. We have quite a bit of pals here, and we're we're getting faster. We're getting better at building these at scale and in number. So here we built about 21 over 4 or 5 days of field work. So that was a good pace for us. Um, and again, you can see that this is just like a large section of creek that's been blown out by a road crossing and then overgrazed by cattle and feral horses. So again, we fenced this project out and then we're adding structure to the channel and we're trying to keep water on this floodplain for longer so that plants can establish and we can kind of start that positive feedback loop. This is cool because you can actually see sometimes the water going onto some of these floodplain surfaces like the same day that you're building. Recognizing that this isn't the former floodplain, this is kind of a new inset floodplain. But yeah, it's cool. You can see the water creeping out onto places it hasn't been for quite some time at these low flows. Um, this is what a beaver dam analog kind of looks like these days. Like Steve mentioned, I think early days it was like kind of clinical, like wicker weave structures, and now we've kind of taken design notes from beavers and we just try to make it as close to a beaver dam as we can. It's quite messy. It's just kind of a mess of sticks and mud and rocks and debris. This is what it looks like at high flow. So if you're a fish, this is why beaver dams are not really fish passage barriers. I mean, fish pick their movement timing carefully, and there's not really going to be a problem for you going over this thing. Um, like Steve mentioned, they fail and they're built to fail. They're designed to fail. Failure is a desired um, occurrence. So at this structure, we knew that it was probably going to end cut at the top of the structure here on your screen. And in doing so, we're getting like this whole new scour pool. The creek is meandering. And then we have this big, huge fan of like nicely sorted gravels immediately downstream of the structure. So um, again, this structure was meant to fail. What we weren't planning on was that it failed the same day that we built it because we got like some huge monsoonal rain that started right as we were finishing this. So this one lasted about 3 hours after taking like the better part of a day to build. But that was cool. While we were there, we were telling people, oh, you have to come back next July, and see if we got some flows. But we didn't even have to wait 5 hours. So you never know. And then yeah, we keep scheming and dreaming. We have lots of different projects kind of all over the place. There's some exciting work, I think, coming up potentially in some urban areas, and those hold some promise as well. There's lots of places. I mean, you can find places like this anywhere. We had quite a habit of straightening and ditching streams, so wherever we've done that, there is opportunities to add structure back into these systems and get complexity. And this is just kind of an example of um, our sort of rough doodling that we undertake as like an initial exercise to kind of start thinking about like how could we change this system by mucking around with it and adding some structure here and there, and how might the channel respond to that. And I think it's important to note that this is occurring not just in like the salmonosphere, I call it. So it's not just for trout. There are projects kind of all over the place, including out in the Great Plains. Um, there's projects in Georgia. There's projects kind of all over the US. Beavers were, pretty ubiquitous across North America. So I think there's opportunities. I don't want you to think that this is just like a mountain and trout habitat methodology because it certainly is not. And yeah, thanks very much. I think I should be on time there.
Thank you, Elliot. You are exactly on time. I really appreciated that add-on. I don't know who that person was telling you we're at the 10-minute mark, but I kind of love that for my future presentations. Just building that time check in. Yeah, great presentation, Elliot. And thank you so much for showing so many of those improvements, being able to see those images of in such a short time, such significant change can occur. Yeah, thank you so much. Reminder to put your questions in the Q&A. Lots are coming through already, and we will get into that after our next speaker. I have the pleasure of introducing Jay Wild. He is a rancher who has implemented BDAs on his ranch in Idaho. I'll pass it over to you, Jay, and you can share your screen and start your presentation.
All right. Well, thanks for the opportunity to share what we've been able to do on our ranch. This is where we're at. We're in the extreme southeast corner of Idaho. This is in the very north end of the Great Basin. And none of the water in the Great Basin goes to the ocean. It all runs to the Great Salt Lake. This is that red outline, that outlines the watershed, the Birch Creek watershed. It's about from the headwaters to where it empties into Mink Creek is about 6.5 miles. Our ranch sits right here in the mouth of this canyon. All this country back here, that's Forest Service land. This is where I grew up, taking care of the cattle, spending a lot of time on horseback, snooping around in these mountains on some adventure. And I left when I graduated high school, went to college, got married, raised a family, pursued a career, but I always wanted to go back. The country and the lifestyle never got out of my blood. And 30 years after I left, I went back. My folks had passed away. The place was in a family trust, and I bought out my siblings and came back home. So Birch Creek is a tributary to Mink Creek, which is a tributary to the Bear River. And the Bear River is the largest source of water for the Great Salt Lake. So when I returned, I found things a lot different. And the big thing that disturbed me was the once perennial stream was no longer perennial. And you can see here in 2007, by June 14th, that it had quit running. So I set out to try and restore that perennial flow. And did a lot of studying and tried different ideas. And I finally came upon the idea that there were no longer beavers in that watershed. Growing up there, we always had 2 or 3 beaver complexes in the stream, in the watershed. And when I returned, the beavers were gone, and so was the flow in the stream. So I started researching and learning about beavers, and the more I learned, the more it made sense that number one, I was going to have to change my attitude about beavers because I grew up hating them. Number two, maybe they was part of the puzzle that was a piece of the puzzle that was missing, that was making our stream dry up. So I was reading an article about beavers. All right, well, let me back up. In 2008, we brought some beavers in. We brought in 5 beavers, 6 beavers, and released them. But nothing happened. I never saw a beaver dam or any kind of a complex begin to show up. 2009, I did it again. I brought 7 more beavers in, released them. The same thing, they just disappeared. We don't know whether they just left or whether predators got them, but it became pretty obvious to me I didn't know what I was doing. So I started learning and researching about beaver relocation. So I was reading an article one day, and it mentioned a fellow at Utah State by the name of Joe Wheaton, and it talked about the success that he was having relocating beavers by using BDAs. So most of the watersheds on the National Forest Service lands. So I had to get the Forest Service on board, and I set up a meeting. We got some Forest Service people there. And Joe came and explained to him the whole concept of low-tech process-based restoration, and they decided, yeah, let's go, let's try and do this. And in the meantime, our district ranger got cold feet on the deal, and he wasn't sure what was going to happen. So we got Brett Roper involved, and he's a Forest Service person, pretty high up in the agency, and he agreed to take responsibility for the project, and that got all our local district people off the hook. So we went ahead. The whole idea of putting a BDA in before we bring the beavers is beavers need water. They need deep enough water. That's their whole defense mechanism, is to be able to get in water and get away from the predators. So it's a security deal for them. That's the whole idea why we built the BDAs to begin with, before we brought the beavers. So the fall of 2014, we built 4 BDAs as a pilot. We needed to know if we could create these ponds that the beavers needed, if we could keep it from freezing over the winter, and if they'd hold up the spring runoff. And we had temp loggers in there through the winter, and they didn't freeze. They held up to the spring runoff, and we had some pretty nice ponds. In 2015, we built some more BDAs. We built 15 more BDAs. And then in the fall of 2015, we brought in 5 beavers and they were live trapped about 70 miles away from where we released them. Idaho Fish and Game got those beavers for us. I always have to throw this slide in. That's pretty special to me. The Natural Resource Conservation Service, that's a government agency we have here in the States. This idea of low-tech process-based restoration was starting to catch on, and they brought a group of NRCS folks in to learn about it and give them some hands-on experience building BDAs. And the neat thing about this photo, it says 3 generations of ranchers. That's my boy, and that's his daughter, and they've been on board with this whole project, and that's been really important to me, that my family has taken an interest and gotten involved in it. So this is a series of slides that shows that's the valley bottom, or the riparian area that we could possibly wet up. That blue ribbon, that was the original stream channel. And this is a pretty small stream. It's actually a tributary to Birch Creek. So we built 4 BDAs here, and they were postless. We didn't drive posts. We wanted to see if we could create BDAs in remote areas where it was too hard to transport the posts and the equipment to drive them. So these BDAs were built without posts, and in some cases that works, but some high flows, they're probably going to be gone. But short term, they work. So we brought in 4 beavers and released here 4 more beavers, and that's what they did. Those red dotted lines. They build up on those BDAs, plus built some of their own dams. That's the ponded areas that they created. And here you see where we're getting the water during high flows. We're getting it out on the floodplain and saturating those soils out there. So by the end of 2015, we'd seen some pretty nice activity. This picture here, we actually put in a BDA here for the beavers and created a pond, but they evidently didn't like it. And downstream about 40 or 50 feet, they built their own dam and actually flooded out the BDA that we'd created for them. These ponds down here were all built. There wasn't any BDAs there. They just built those ponds on their own. One thing you have to make sure, if you're going to leverage beavers, you got to get the grazing right. This is a photo point. This is what it looked like in 2001, pretty much overgrazed and degraded. We changed our whole management scheme, and we didn't use this area in the summertime. We did graze it in the fall. We didn't let any cattle in here until after the 1st of September, and you can see by 2015 the recovery that we got. And then in 2016, the beavers moved in. So you got to get the grazing right if you're gonna attract beavers, or if you're gonna bring them in. There's a drone shot of a meadow showing during high flows how we're getting the water up on the floodplain, saturating the water table out there. For a few years, we were counting those dams and keeping track of what we had. We don't do that anymore. By 2019, we had 140 dams. Presently, my best guess would be we probably got 250 beaver dams. So it's been pretty exciting to see all the beaver activity. They are reproducing. You can see a kit here that's evidently hitching a ride on an adult. Trail camera caught that. There's another kid out there in the middle of the pond. Okay, this is a graph. That line represents a nearby stream that, without beavers, that dries up in the summertime. And the blue dots are what our Birch Creek dry up days were pre-beaver. So we've got days of the year plotted on a vertical axis, and flow plotted on the horizontal axis. The brown dots are after the beavers came. And by 2023, we had perennial flow. And we've had perennial flow ever since. We've got Bonneville cutthroat trout in Birch Creek. It seems like everywhere I go, there's a cutthroat trout that's in trouble. And this is really exciting for me to see the fish response that we've had. In 2001 and 2012, the Forest Service electrofished, and this is what they found. Actually, less than 5 fish per 100 meters. And you can see the response. The beavers were reintroduced here in 2015. by 2019, this is what we had. This was in a beaver complex, and this is in the free flowing reach. So the fish response, and it's something that I hadn't really ever thought about, but looking at it now, it's probably one of the most important things we did. That's my granddaughter and one of those cutthroats that she caught out of a beaver pond. A lot of folks ask me, how come you do what you do? How come you come back to the ranch? And how come you do what you do? And this statement pretty well spells out why I'm here. Oh, I don't know if I took up enough time, but that's the end of my presentation.
That's perfect. Thanks so much, Jay. I really appreciate all the effort that you've put onto your ranch in this respect over the years, and your desire for communicating that to others is just so valuable. Thank you so much. Also, what a beautiful life you have. It's such so nice to see all of the images of your family on the land as well, embracing uh, this as well. And yeah, echoing others' comments, just incredible stewardship of the land that your family has history on and community. Um, so that concludes our our speaker run, and now we get to enter into Q&A. So I just want to thank all the speakers again for your valuable insights. We have about just shy of 20 minutes to get into Q&A. And before I do, I want to remind you that you are automatically registered for part 2 of this webinar next week, which is scheduled for March 5th. Part 2 is called From Ideas to Installation. And we have Amy Burlando from Cows and Fish, Deanne Duval from Freshwater Conservation Canada, and Alan First Rider from Blood Tribe Land Management. And someone did ask in the Q&A about permits. Leslie replied that we will be talking about regulatory considerations at the webinar next week. So hopefully you can join us as we dive more into that subject. Generally, as Leslie pointed out, it does depend on the jurisdiction you're in, so we'll get a bit of a wide view of that with our speakers next week. So I invite all of our speakers to turn on their cameras as we get into this Q&A. I have 2 questions off the top that are for all. There's quite a few questions that came through, so I have the task of synthesizing and relaying some of them so we can get a discussion going. So the first question, Juliana asked, on what types of land are most beaver-based restoration projects being implemented that you've witnessed? So example, protected or parkland, crown land, private or municipal. And also, who typically initiates these projects in your experience? What motivates them? We obviously heard Jay and your motivation for it and the connection to the land as well. But yeah, if you could relay some other motivating factors for folks that you've seen implement these projects. And anyone can go first, or I can tap on Elliot.
Yeah, I guess in our experience, like there's kind of 2 core demographics, I guess. There's the public land realm where like a lot of our objectives are about like our ecological, like we're interested in recovering fish populations and improving habitat and reversing habitat degradation. Then we have like another sort of like group of interested folks on private land, and I think we have less we're not like making the same sales pitch there, or sometimes we're not even making a sales pitch at all. They're coming to us, and it's usually like exactly like what Jay was talking about, where it's a situation where it's yeah, we have this creek, it used to flow all the time, now it doesn't run anymore. Yeah, and that's like it can be as simple as that. And in those circumstances, usually our pitch is just kind of trying to have more water around for a longer period of time. And then there's all the other side benefits, but that's kind of less central of a goal than just like keeping things wet for as long as we can.
Great. I can move on to the next question. It was asked if there are some risks associated with BDAs, like increase of heavy metals in pounded areas or risk to downstream infrastructure. Can you speak to any of those risks to help us better understand?
Yeah, there's always risks. There's risks in life in general, but there's also a risk of not doing restoration. There's numerous species that are endangered, and there's lost productivity everywhere. So there's certainly risk, but I think generally speaking, that risk is overemphasized and has been in the past. It's unlikely you're going to kill anybody building a BDA, and sure, maybe a road crossing or something could be damaged, but those road crossings are already very vulnerable to failure because they were often built undersized for the river that they're in, because we like to spend the least amount of money possible to do things. And so like I said, there's in my presentation, that there is a lot of uncertainty in everything we do, but most of that uncertainty can be managed by just trying to understand what that uncertainty is and how important it is. So risk is probably more important than what is the actual reference condition for this site. You can begin this kind of work with a lot of uncertainty. And certainly if you have lots and lots of infrastructure where you want to work, the risk is higher. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't suggest your first BDA project be in a very high risk area. If you flip to that somewhere in that manual that got posted, there is a little checklist in there for risk, and it's fairly simple to go through.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, love a checklist to try and assess risk because, yeah, risk is in everything. It's inherent to our life and world. So, yeah, appreciate that you've paid a lot of attention to that, but it does sound like a lot of the benefits outweigh some of those risks. I'll just let you know, Stephen, that your camera is frozen. So if you wanted to turn it off and on again, that might help reset it. And I have a question for Jay. Kevin asked, do you have any advice to get acceptance from folks with different views or expectations? So like neighboring ranchers or recreational users, noting that these can be seen as a barrier for kayakers, for example. And how have you navigated this?
Well, our stream, Birch Creek, isn't big enough for a kayak, so we haven't had to worry about those folks. I think it's all a matter of education. If you can get folks on board, and one thing that I tried to do when we were building those BDAs is try and get a local person or two involved. That way they take ownership for the project, and they're more likely to get behind you. But when people start seeing the results, when they see a stream that's been drying up for 30 years, when they see it run perennial, and the only thing that's changed is we put beavers in, that's a pretty good thing to motivate people to change their mind. And beavers have got a bad rap for a long time, but I think that whole idea is beginning to turn around. People are beginning to accept the fact that we need them in these watersheds.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, and I know involving your community in that fosters that buy-in and ownership. And when Elliot was pointing out in some of the projects, it's also community building by doing it, and it looks like a lot of fun too, having people act like beavers and building their habitats. And the next question is for Elliot. John asked a question. How can you implement BDAs to improve health stream without impacting nearby infrastructure?
Yeah, good question. Um, I feel like that's just part of the limitations, like at the start of your project. That's part of like kind of the design exercise is just like sit down and be like, what are the limitations? Like, what is realistic? How much real estate do we have to play with? And then also just like asking what seems like a stupid question sometimes, which is just like, can we move the thing that is in the floodplain? Like, why is it there? Does it need to be there? Is it always going to be there? Because sometimes the answer is like, oh yeah, actually we totally could move that. We hadn't even thought of that. I'd say it's rare that that's the case, but yeah, I think that's just part of the conceptualization phase is like what what real estate do we have to work with, and is it realistic to um, access that whole area again, or is there some constraints that we got to be mindful of so that we don't create a situation where people are not supporting this kind of work? So yeah, I think probably the example John's thinking of is the slide that had Nose Creek on it, and yeah, there I think it would just be a matter of thinking hard about like how much room do we have to wiggle and where can we not accept any movement. And yeah, that's just part of the project in the early days.
Fantastic. I'm ripping through these because we have so many and it's great to get engagement from folks on the webinar. The next question is for Stephen. Uh, it's a bit more technical. It's just a question on what minimum stream flow you want to concentrate on for BDAs generally. Like what is a good yeah, stream flow for approaching these projects?
Um, I don't know if there's a minimum of, Elliot showed examples where there was no flow at certain times of the year. So uh, it's about understanding the role of beaver in that place that you're in. If you're in a really dry place, what we've are starting to see, is there's a continuum of beaver activity as well. And there's places where beaver are on the landscape continually and they're never gone. And then in those are generally wetter places with lots of vegetation and good flow. And then in drier areas, they may be there during areas at times when there is more water available. And then they're gone for a decade or two or three. Um, so I wouldn't think of it in terms of minimum flow. Maximum flow can be an inhibitor for beavers. So there's a thing called stream power, and at some level of stream power, the dams will always fail, and so beavers will build them, and they just get washed out every year. Uh, you can look up that, and we have papers on what those numbers are, but it, yeah, so I'm not sure exactly what the question is, other than is there a minimum flow? No, there's not a minimum flow, but there is a maximum flow. The thing though about stream power is when you widen the stream, same amount of water going down, but the stream is wider, it has less stream power because the real stream power, when you divide it by width, it becomes less. So even though you could still have a really large stream with a lot of water, beaver can still be there if that water is getting divided by multiple channels or is being spread out. And that's why you will find beaver along really, really large rivers like the Columbia River or some other river, because they're living on the side in channels that are on the side of these big rivers. So, yeah, I'll stop
Those
talking
are
right
No, those are great points to reflect on. And yeah,
now. Yeah,
especially because when we saw, yeah, that there are some situations where there's no water on the landscape and very little. And so you're
yeah.
bringing that back. The challenge is to apply some
We
sort of flow and support that. So it's a good
we've been
reminder.
we've been working a lot in Nevada, and it doesn't get any drier than Nevada. And
Yes.
there's beaver sign everywhere. It's amazing, and it's kind of a chicken and an egg thing. You know, the beaver come and make these little streams livable for then more beaver to come, or what. But a small amount of water, if it's dammed up, can do great things.
Mhm. I guess the next question is probing for, I think a lot of folks that are on the call are from the Canadian Prairie region. That's the scope that we kind of reached out to in our network. And I know that Elliot overlaps with as well. So Sarah and Richard both had some questions noting that a lot of the examples today have been forested areas, or Stephen, you've also brought up the examples of some desert regions. So just curious about how common these types of projects are in the Canadian prairies, to your knowledge, or prairies within your country that you're joining from. Do you have examples of other types of ecosystems, boreal, grassland examples to point to, or ones that stand out that folks could explore further?
Uh, so is that a question for me right now?
It's
Yeah,
for anyone that would like to
yeah,
chime in, yeah.
yeah. So if you look at the beaver literature, you know, there's a lot of beaver literature for everywhere in North America. Like Elliot mentioned, beaver were everywhere. So if you're wondering, the answer is yes, they were there. You know, it's highly unlikely that you live in the one place that they didn't occur in North America. Um, so then it just becomes, what is their role, and that time scale thing that I was talking about. And so we have been working a lot in more in places like eastern Montana, which is prairie. And there's papers out on all this stuff as well. But we know a lot less. People didn't study rivers. Most river scientists studied rivers in nice places in the mountains. And so we know less about them. But I can guarantee you, beaver were a part of those landscapes. And there was probably cottonwood galleries along a lot of the rivers and streams, even intermittent ones. And they've just been converted by farming and grazing. And so there may be no evidence of that anymore, but they were there. The question is, how long is it going to take you to restore that? And I think that was some of my main message, is that there's going to be places that you work in where it's much harder. The source beaver population may be hundreds of miles away or kilometers, you know. So, and your water supply is, your flow regime is way different on the prairies, and it's basically unpredictable. Yeah, some of the places we were working, you wouldn't get a high flow for a few years, and then you would get a high flow that was biblical. And those are really hard places to be successful in a short period of time.
Yeah, I'm aware of like I think it's a good opportunity. I think in like the fish world, the Great Plains is like outer space because it does historically didn't have a lot of the game fish that people care about. So doesn't have the same amount of funding, didn't have the same amount of interest. But yeah, I think it's like a huge opportunity and probably like some of the highest need is actually in those spaces, like to Stephen's point. So um yeah, I think it's a big opportunity if people are looking to be early adopters, then I encourage that.
You're on mute, Elizabeth.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I have time for a silly question. This has just come to mind as a beaver novice. Any notable beaver interactions that you've had that you'd like to share, whether like interactions with their like behavior or personality, or um, their general vibe as an animal that you get to interact with, that you want to share?
Uh, yeah, they're incredibly docile, beautiful animals, really. You know, so yeah, we have a beaver relocation facility, and so I've gotten to hang out with a few and trap a few, and it's just amazing how shy they are. And I mean,
Right.
they'll occasionally try to defend themselves, but generally they just are like a little teddy bear. And then they're just so darn hardworking. I mean, I can't think of any other animal that just works day in, day out to make the the rest of the ecosystem beneficial for other animals. You know, it's pretty crazy.
Amazing. Do you have any fun interactions that you've had, Jay or Elliot, with the beavers themselves?
Well, they're pretty much nocturnal, so you've got to be there at sunset or daylight in the morning.
Right.
But we've enjoyed. I've got some videos. I actually recorded one that was chirping, and that was interesting. They do, they're not silent. They do communicate, I suppose, with each other. But it's been fun to watch them.
Cool. If you can't tell, I'm very jealous that you've had so many interactions with beavers. So thanks for indulging that last question. Thanks again, Stephen, Elliot, and Jay for joining us as part of this panel today. It's been recorded and it'll be posted online by IISD. Again, I'll invite you, if you've been inspired to explore a BDA project in your region, to reach out directly to Ashley from IISD. She'll post her email in the chat again. And a friendly reminder as well that the next webinar as part of this series is next week on March 5th. And the title of that is From Ideas to Installation. And we have another panel of speakers for that joining us. So thanks again and have a great rest of your day, everyone.